Welcome to Gwydion's Asshole Podcast, episode 137. You might have noticed that Edward did not chime in and correct me. That's because I'm all alone here, back in the pyramid. But we're going to get Edward here on the line in just a moment. Well, let's do that now.
Hello.
Hey, Edward, it's Gwydion.
Oh, hey, Gwydion.
Hey, how you been?
Yeah, I'm just walking to the store.
Oh,
pick
cool.
up some Maggie and bread and,
Going to the grocery store?
No, we got this small little, what you call an uncle store in India.
An uncle
just
store?
like a small, like before the Piggly Wiggly.
The Piggly Wiggly?
Yeah, you might want to refer people to, I think it was, 99% Invisible did a thing on the Piggly Wiggly.
Oh, yeah.
Basically, there's like a guy standing behind a counter, and then he or she, goes and grabs whatever you need and then bags it for you, and you pay rather than going and getting it off the shelves yourself. That was the Piggly Wiggly. Introduced that. That's like the grocery store format that everybody takes for granted at Vaughn's and Ralph's and that kind of thing.
That's very interesting. So what's new? You got anything you want to share here on the episode?
I don't have anything right now that I can think of, but
Yeah, no, it's interesting hearing the ambient sounds of India.
here, one sec. Hey. Maggie, too? Good, how are you?
Motorcycle going by. Something.
Hi, how are you?
Good, how are you?
Good, thank you.
Friendly people, sounds like.
Maggie, 2 small. Yeah, 2 of those. And 4 gold flake light piece. Gold flake light? Yeah, 4 piece.
This broadcast is brought to you in association with Charged by Vodafone. Shindan Panther TMK Reapers. Dual A Plus with Japanese technology and official gas to Giga broadcast partner. Find level server. Download now.
And this.
Betul, masala popcorn na din siya. Masala popcorn. Popcorn. Dapat ito. Dapat ito.
No?
Yeah.
120.
Okay. I think I have change, but let me check. Yeah, that's all I've got. That's all I've got.
Okay.
Sorry.
लाल पापड़ 150 200 नहीं बड़ा
Thank you.
क्योंकि किस तरह से उनके जो प्रमुख खिलाड़ी है या फिर मैच जरूर देखा होगा,
लाल
सारे प्रशिक्षकों ने देखा होगा, नजर रखी होगी।
Okay, sorry about that.
Did I hear you order cigarettes? Are you smoking again, Edward?
Yeah, just we're planning to cut back to 0 on tomorrow. I had a nasty fall.
Oh man!
When it was pouring rain and walking on some slippery stairs and just ate it. And we could tell from the various points of contact with the stairs that my left arm was the hero, and took a lot of bruises, and my left wrist is still healing. It just went down and took all the force, and there was like a couple of cuts like right on the vertebrae, right on the spine. So my right arm completely fine. My spine was saved, and my left arm is the hero. So I had a lot of communing with Chesed and Jupiter after that.
Well, we're all grateful to your left arm, Edward.
Kind of like
Good reflexes.
looking into whatever symbolism as per, U documents. What was it? U1? Magical mirror of the universe or whatever.
I think so, yeah.
But anyway, I'm about to head in and make some breakfast. I hope you have a good episode, and I'll check in later and see what's going on.
All right.
With the episode, and wish you all the best.
Thank you. You
love
too.
to everyone in the pyramid there.
Oh, it's just me.
Oh, that must get lonely.
No. I do a lot of meditating. Bush family occasionally drops by. Except for Jeb. He's not allowed in the pyramid.
Okay. All right. Talk soon.
All right. Take care. So, for today, what we're going to do... See, originally, I think it was 8 years ago or so, the first of the Edward Reeb podcasts was called Edward Reeb's Podcast. And the second was this one you're hearing now, Gwydion's Astral Podcast. The Edward Reeb Podcast was basically Edward just rambling, just talking. It's sometimes like free associating, and sometimes like sharing, deeply personal memories or things he was going through, things he really ought not to have shared with the whole world. And so at the same time, there was that 5-year gap between the episode called Taro and the one called Ancient Love Propaganda. So after the episode called Taro, when Edward removed the Gwydion podcast from existence, he at the same time took down the Edward Reeb podcast, which had many episodes, over 100. And one of the last ones was when he interviewed Jin Fang, who was a Chinese woman in Kathmandu there. And she was sharing a lot of details about, kind of gory details about what her grandparents went through under Mao. And then, you know what, actually I'm going to bleep out her name, because what ended up happening was she was really nervous about, the Chinese government and their, sweeping of the internet and stuff, and voice recognition and all this stuff, flagging certain keywords of what we were talking about. So there was a lot of gaps in that conversation, and the Chinese national anthem played over parts that she didn't want aired live. They were a little too sensitive. And then like 2 days later, some like really short amount of time after that went on the air, there was a man from Beijing who was standing outside of where Edward was teaching yoga in Kathmandu. And he, kind of specifically was looking at Edward and saying, hey, I'm a tourist. Could you recommend a good place to have breakfast? And won't you join me for breakfast? And this kind of thing. And Edward kind of was suspicious, because this is sort of, CCP is famous for sending people to go check out, people. And so Edward just shared his whole family history and how, the 30 or 21 years that his grandpa spent in China, and how he was, running into and having an adversarial relationship with the communists back then before they took over the government, and sort of some of the epic stories of what happened there. And ended up sharing hundreds of scanned photographs with the man. And the man was saying, hey, I have a friend at the Ministry of History, and I would love to share this with her, and, add this to the National Archives and all this. And I said, sure, and sent him everything I had that I had scanned from those days. But anyway, this ties in nicely to what today's episode is going to be about. So, now and then, over time, what I've decided to do is to resurrect certain key episodes from the Edward Reeb podcast that were recorded at various points in time between whenever, 2015 and 2017, and air them here on episodes of Gwydion's Astral podcast. So this is an episode where Edward went and interviewed his dad's childhood best friend, Ron De Luco, about his grandmother, our grandmother, really. So this is the mother of John Dan Reeb. Her name was Harriet Howie Reeb. Harriet Howe, Howe, I don't know I think it was, maybe it's Howie or Howe. Anyway, doesn't matter too much, but it's sort of one of those things that really ought not to be lost. So, why not just put it here? So this is going to be a bit of a long one, and this is sort of a long intro for this long episode. And, anybody who's, for whatever reason, interested in history or interested in hearing about, someone from history, or maybe for whatever reason specifically interested in the, whatever details that Ron remembered about Harriet, the paternal grandmother of Edward Reeb and second wife of Dan Cleveland Reeb of Standard Oil Shanghai fame, if you will, if there is such a thing. So, without further ado, here is the, up until now, lost episode of Edward Reeb's podcast, in which he interviews Ron De Luco about Harriet.
Welcome to Edward Reeb's podcast, episode 42.
Harriet Louise Howie Reeb, a.k.a.
Professor John Dan Reeb, part 14. Both very auspicious numbers. I don't know about you, but I've noticed that there seems to be a certain poignancy to the 42nd episode of all of the podcasts that I have that have 42 episodes or more. Now, as I say that, I'm not entirely sure offhand, and I'm driving right now, so, just for the sake of today's episode, I'm not going to scroll through at the moment, maybe later, to determine, okay, I'll do it. I'm coming up to a stop sign. There's no harm in it. No harm whatsoever, right? Episode 42 of the Pymander is, I'm 37, I'm not old. Well, okay. That was my 37th birthday, and it was kind of a pivotal moment. It was where I was kind of deciding toward, becoming vegan. I think that was the episode where I talked about how I celebrated by going to the Northwoods Inn, and they brought a freshly slaughtered cow to the table for $70, and, that kind of thing. It was September 29th, the death day anniversary of my father, who, is the Professor John Dan Reeve that we're talking about. It was he had been gone for how many years? I guess it would have been 23 years. So on his 23rd death day, I gave up meat and dairy, not really connected, but yet connected, not connected to him, but more connected to me, but yet maybe connected to him, because he was kind of unhealthy, and hence he died young. So not to say that being vegan is necessarily the healthiest thing I could be doing, it just feels karmically healthy. Anyway, that's not what this episode's about. We're going to be sitting down and having coffee with Ron De Luco again. This is the second interview with Ron, my dad's old best friend growing up. He remembers my grandmother, and he just might be alone in that. And I went through the old treasure chest of memories this morning, just now, and discovered a few things I had never seen before in there. Pictures of my grandma when she was young, posing with other models and swimmers, and a cosmetology school journal that I'm going to be giving to Janie, because she's currently in cosmetology school, and now she's going to have my father's mother's cosmetology school journal, which is in an Egyptian-style journal and very nicely handwritten. Pretty great. I think it was from the 50s, or maybe early 60s. So, of course, Janie can update it. But there's all kinds of old recipes and stuff in it. Pretty sweet. Pretty sweet stuff. All right. We're coming up to Zephyr now. Coffee place in Pasadena. Just got to make a U-turn, that is. That might be a California colloquialism, or at least an American one. Okay. Flipping a bitch is another way to put it. Sorry for the profanity. I'm going to have to mark this one explicit. Now, can I find a parking place? That is the next important. Yes. Yes!
So it's not
Redundant?
repetitive. Though there may be incidents
It's
that...
okay, I don't mind repetition. This is just raw material stuff.
I need that as a memory jog, so...
Yeah. Oh, I brought some memory jogs, too. Let me use the restroom and
Sure.
get a coffee, and I'll be right back.
Okay.
And if you want, feel free to look through this.
Oh, great.
Okay, I'll be right back.
There she is. Yeah,
Good stuff, huh?
I didn't see all of these pictures in my youth, but that might have been her when she was a girl.
Oh, wow.
I can see the resemblance.
Yeah. Yeah, there was so many interesting ones in there.
Some of these she may have shown me of her days in China. I remember she had one with a limousine kind of and a footman and all of that that she showed me once. Yeah, that looks like her sitting on the steps, and that looks like Dan's father, as I remember him looking.
Yeah.
I never met him personally. I only saw pictures. So that looks like her at a social gathering. I don't know what the social gathering.
Yeah, there's another I think her parents are featured prominently in the beginning of this one.
Right. You can see the resemblance with the grandmother.
And there's her first husband.
Yeah, I saw his picture too.
Oh.
I remember her showing me that.
I don't. I'm not sure which one
I'll
one
show
is
you.
him.
I remember her showing me it. It was only toward her latter years that she showed me. I think she said she had even met Madame Chiang Kai-shek. There weren't a whole lot of people she didn't meet. She even, as I say here, the incident with Will Rogers.
Yeah.
He was up in Harbin with her, and he would sit next to her at dinner.
This is interesting.
And
It's a coin that says George B. Ott.
yeah, I saw it.
Oh, I'm recording.
The Warren Academy. Oh, okay.
Yeah, the Warren Academy of Arts and Sciences. Is that what it says?
Okay, yeah.
It's a coin of some kind. Does this look familiar?
No,
Okay, I was just wondering.
not at all.
if it looked familiar.
That's yours.
Did you ever play playing cards with?
No,
I was just wondering if this might look familiar. It was.
I have no idea who that is.
Okay. Yeah, I don't know either. Just
However,
for
I'll go
fun, I
back-
brought my dad's tarot deck. Did you ever see that?
Probably did.
Yeah.
But now this looks like her mother.
Oh yeah.
I know that, and she had a brother.
Oh okay.
That might be the brother.
The uncle.
I don't know.
Oh, Harriet's brother.
Harriet's brother. Yeah, Harriet.
Oh yeah.
He
Okay,
was,
yeah,
From what
I'm
I
vaguely aware
understand,
of
he
him.
was an alcoholic,
Oh okay.
and I think it eventually got the better of him. Now, who these are?
I don't know.
I haven't the foggiest idea.
People she knew, I guess.
They look like they're probably important Chinese, either royalty or whatever.
Oh, they're on a sign. That's like a post.
Oh,
And this
okay.
is like so they're probably people running for political office that
Could
year.
be.
They have those in Japan. They have only certain places where they can post political flyers. To Harriet.
I have no idea who that is.
The red.
Never saw that one. Of course, you have to remember, I know more than most, but again, not everything was shared.
Of
with
course.
me. That looks like Dan when he was a boy.
Yeah.
1949. Yeah, he was about
Wow.
9 years old.
Huh. Yeah, I've never actually seen any of this before today.
Really?
Yeah.
Where was it?
In a treasure chest in my living room. Yeah, there's a bunch of storage.
Now that looks like
That's,
Harriet's mother.
Yeah,
Is
and
it
Harriet's
enough
mother was Harriet also, right?
Was she? I have no idea what her name
I'm
was.
not entirely sure.
Her
I'm gonna
mother's.
double check
she
that.
told me I think her mother was an opera singer. Had
Yeah.
been an opera singer.
Yeah, she had given up her career for her husband, is what I heard. Oh, that's when my dad went to Poly. Poly, it's
Okay, yeah, I know where.
Pasadena.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm recording, so it's a lot of these people don't know.
Yeah. When there he is, right there. When he went to Poly, I went to Mount Lowe Military Academy.
Oh, right on.
Yeah, and this
Social event, cotillion or something.
No. This goes back to your grandmother's time, I'm
Oh.
sure. And I'm looking for a familiar face. This might be Ott here. I'm not sure.
Oh, wow. What
I'm
a
not
gentleman.
sure. But he's not sitting next to your grandmother. But that could be him. I don't know. And I'm looking for her, which would be I don't see her anywhere.
Maybe she's taking the picture.
I don't think they would have done that in those days. It was beneath them in that kind of a society. No. And remember, they had professional photographers in those days.
I see.
They didn't, the average person.
Didn't just walk around with a camera.
this looks-
Oh, that's Dan. I haven't seen that picture of my grandpa before. But
Yeah.
that's definitely him.
And
wow, that's so good. That's so sharp.
Yeah. And then this one I remember seeing.
Yeah.
That's Dan as a baby. Your dad.
Yeah.
As a baby.
So when he says Dan, he means John Dan. And when
John
I say
Dan,
Dan,
yeah.
I mean Dan C. Reed.
Okay. You can see even there it says Dan.
Uh-huh.
And when your dad addresses it on the in the video,
Oh.
he says, "I'm little Dan Reed." Okay, let's see what we have here. If there's anything there. Well, that looks like your dad when he was born, probably, because everybody's Chinese. He was born in Shanghai,
yeah.
as you probably know.
Wow, he's a big baby.
Oh yeah. This looks like your grandmother here on this one. That looks like Harriet right there. She told me she used to play tennis with the Romanovs, which were, the deposed Tsar of Russia.
Right.
And up in Harbin, apparently they had gone to Harbin after Russia fell with the Bolsheviks.
So that's who she and George Ott were hanging out with before she went down?
I don't know, George, she didn't tell me about George until probably a few years before she died. And so anytime she said her husband, I just naturally pictured Dan's father.
Right.
Now this could be her brother. I see a resemblance of, but he looks
that looks like
a
Dan.
Reeb.
Yeah,
that looks like a Reeb.
That looks like Dan trying to appear to be older than he is. Dan C. Reeb, that is.
Your grandfather.
Yeah. This was April 28th, 1913. He would have been 21.
Yeah, I have no idea.
He would have been 20. He wouldn't have turned 21 yet, because he was a Scorpio. I don't remember his birthday.
I haven't the foggiest idea who this was. Now, I told you that your grandmother...
That's him again. That's Dan.
Is it?
Looking cool.
I told you your grandmother was up in Montana. I think she was from Wyoming.
Oh, right.
Not Montana.
Oh, okay.
And the British connection you were looking for was Sir Thomas Hooker.
Oh, yeah. Sir Thomas Hooker, and he's connected to General Joe Hooker.
Could be. But I remember Dan showing me pictures and something or other when we were kids and talking about Sir Thomas Hooker. Now, this was 1915, and that even says who it was. So
Gus Kobe.
I have no idea.
No idea who that is.
Looks
like it was in China, though.
Yes, I'm sure.
One of their friends in China, in Shanghai.
There's a interesting picture. And here's your grandmother. Well,
Chinese
probably,
guard.
if I had to guess her age here, in her 20s, maybe.
Oh, yeah. I love that picture of her.
Now, here's Dan C. That looks like him.
Yeah.
This is probably the house staff.
Funny. He's smoking.
Everybody smoked. Everyone smoked in that time. Today, as much as you see people not smoking, everyone did smoke then.
That was their staff. I wonder which one was... My aunt was talking about how there was one they called Boy that was like the savior to her mom that helped her to...
Here's Dan C. Looks like the father.
Yeah, totally.
And that says the company car. I don't know what that is. Here's a Tibetan... Oh, that's his name, Tachian Lu.
Oh, cool. I should post this online and see if it's anybody's ancestor.
And then this looks like they may have been decorating for Christmas or something. I wonder. I've never seen that one. This looks like Dan as a baby. Your father.
Yeah. Now, so the room doesn't look familiar?
I may have seen it, and she may have explained it, but it didn't take. Here's your dad in a probably high school play or something.
Oh, it says Morton and Betty's home in Mukden. So that was their friends in China. But we could keep going with this, or we could move on to... Oh, well, here's something. Oh, this play. That was my dad.
That was your dad, yeah.
Did you see this play?
No.
Oh, okay.
No.
My dad played some kind of bad guy in that. There he is.
Yep. I wonder if he has his photograph from when we were in school together. That looks like him. No, that's not him.
That's
your
grandfather. My aunt.
And your aunt. Okay.
She just passed away about a month ago.
This looks like he may have been a young lad there.
Yeah.
Dan C.
Yeah. These are great pictures. I need to scan all of these. That's probably Harriet's dad.
Think so?
Or maybe George.
Doesn't look like George. I'll show you a picture of George.
Okay. Yeah, it doesn't say who's...
Oh, there's Harriet on the beach. Oh, these are wonderful. I love looking at old photographs.
Yeah.
I don't know who that is.
Huh. I don't know either.
It may be written on the back of it, on the back of the picture.
On the back, yeah.
And this looks like a relation of Dan's. Look at it here.
Let me look at it real quick.
You know, Dan C.
Yeah. It could have been. There's a Nick or what's his name? I forget his name.
And
there was
this
a
guy
gay
looks,
brother.
This could be a relation of Dan C. Look at it in here.
Wow. Cut like a. There's a Charles Edward Reeb. There's.
I've gone through now and marked a lot of my photographs because my son won't know who the people are.
Yeah, exactly. I know, right? That's what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to preserve some memories for the future.
And for you, it's more difficult because your dad died young. This is Dan C. here.
But it makes it more of an adventure. I probably wouldn't have been motivated to do any of this if he were still alive. I'd be like, "That's nice, Dad. Yeah, it's a good story."
Fred Too Good from 6th from left. 2 4. Is it this guy?
Fred Too
Or is
Good.
it this guy? I haven't any idea.
Fred Too Good, 6th from left.
Now, I don't know if this is your great-grandmother.
Wow.
That's a fancy picture there.
Dang. That's old school.
Yeah, very old.
Whew. All right.
Okay.
Cool.
All right. You don't want to...
Yeah.
You want to see Ott's picture in there?
Oh, sure.
In the front.
Mm-hmm.
I ran across it because I remember her showing that one to me. That looks like your dad giving an address.
Oh, cool. Oh, wow. What a
Here
trip.
she is in a chorus line or something.
Oh,
That's
yeah,
her
yeah.
right there.
Yeah.
That's her. I remember seeing that picture. Was this the house on Lambert?
Maybe.
Because I don't remember this refrigerator,
Mm.
but it was situated with, if you were looking from one end of it, it was situated this way, and then the stove and that would have been this way. That would have been the back door.
I see.
But the back door, I remember, had a glass in it, but I could be... Now, this one of these guys could be your grandfather. I don't know which.
Let me see.
Here's Ott right here. That's him.
Neither. Oh, okay.
That's the picture
Yeah,
I remember
I know
her
that
showing
face.
me.
Oh, yeah, that's okay. Now I recognize him from the other picture that you thought it was him.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, he's a handsome man. He's the one who passed away from
He was her first husband.
congenital syphilis. It was hereditary. Yeah.
Woo. And then your great grandmother.
Yeah. So now we're going around in circles.
Yeah,
Okay. I'll put this.
I do that all my life anyway.
I'll put this one over here. I'll just keep an eye on it.
Mm-hmm.
Now, do you happen to know? These are some old pictures, but it looks like they were cut out of a book or something. I just don't know why my.
I have. It seems to me I've seen these, but I can't.
Yeah.
recall.
Me
Nothing
either.
written on the back of them.
Mm-mm.
On the photographs themselves.
Oh, maybe. Yeah. And then there's these in frames here.
I think. Is that Mary Baker Eddy?
You're probably right.
I have no idea.
Maybe young Mary Baker Eddy. Oh, and do you happen to know anything about this? It looks to me to be an Egyptian-style journal or notebook of my grandmother's for cosmetology school. It seems.
Well, there was
to me.
a period. If I had to guess a period, that Egyptology was the big vogue thing, and that would have been in about the 1920s, about the time they discovered King Tut's tomb. This motif on the front
Right.
would have been a selling.
But cosmetology goes
Yeah.
back to Egypt. That's
But,
probably the connection she was making. But I was just wondering if you remember her going to cosmetology school, or if...
Your grandmother?
Yeah.
She never said it to me. With this, the handwriting, what it tells me, and I don't remember. I may have something that she wrote to me a long time ago, and I do think she had this slanted to the left. This tells you a person that is
Left-handed.
No.
Oh.
That is very introverted, very quiet about them. They won't talk about themselves much.
Yeah.
That's what this,
Interesting.
that slant, and you get straight up and then you get over to the right.
Yeah.
I did some things on handwriting years ago. It was a thing of mine. But I've known people that are very open and that wrote this way too. At least they were to me. There might be some part of their lives and they don't
Yeah.
want to
So
talk
that's
about.
that's interesting. I'm going to give this to my wife because she's in cosmetology school now.
Uh-huh.
And
I just wasn't sure if it was from the 50s or the 60s. She
No,
said
my
she'll
guess
be
is-
able to tell.
My guess is that dates back to the 20s. That
Wow.
book.
Oh, the book, yeah. And then this is apparently Nancy Reeb, my dad's first wife.
Yeah, I
Apparently
think
their
so.
wedding.
Yeah. You know, it's been a long time since I've seen her. I'd have to.
I think she's still around.
She was. Are we
Somewhere.
recording?
Yeah, I can edit it if you want.
Well, after she and Dan went their separate ways,
Mm-hmm.
she took up with a friend of his that was a physicist.
Dick
and-
Pierce.
Yeah, and they were living together, as far
Mhm.
as I know. And I met her, and I met Dick. Dick seems to be a very nice guy.
Yeah. A letter of appreciation from the Ministry of Health and Social Affairs, Republic of Korea, to my grandmother.
1963. Wow.
Yeah. Special thanks to all your support, all your help with the
Oh,
for
that's
the Korean
wonderful.
people.
I never knew anything about this.
Yeah, me neither.
So,
Yeah, I just thought some of these might stick. You know, something might go. Oh yeah, I remember that.
I never even knew she was in Korea.
Or maybe she just sent money.
Could have been, yeah. She was, Van Tassel took advantage of her. One of the pictures in that album was a glamour photo, I remember, of your grandmother. That was on. Oh, yeah, that was Dan about the time we were, yeah, probably a little younger. Yeah, probably a little bit younger than when we were kids.
And then, does this look like maybe George Ott?
Sure does, doesn't it?
All right.
It might be written on the back. You never know.
Yeah, maybe.
Yeah.
You know, it's funny. I have like an old-timey photo album. No photos in it at all. All the photos are loose in bags. So it was like someone intended to, at some point. Now that that's out of the way.
Okay. Is there any? You want me to be redundant or just
Sure.
go through
Yeah.
them?
Let's be redundant. It's all good.
Okay. Let me go down here.
Because you might cover an aspect of it you didn't last time. And
I think I told you about Chinatown, and of course you know how kids were. She'd take us to Chinatown. On the weekends we would either go to Chinatown or the farmers market.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember them building CBS on the corner of Fairfax and Beverly. And little did I know that probably 20 years later I'd be working there. But so I watched them build that when I was a 12-year-old boy, because she would take us either to Chinatown or the farmers market for dinner. And I can remember, you know how kids are, say something to the guy in Chinese, and so she did, because she spoke fluent Chinese. And he said, "I'm sorry, I don't speak Chinese." And she taught me to eat with chopsticks.
Nice.
Which I remember to this day. And I don't know if you know, your father had a secret panel box collection. He had a huge collection of secret panel boxes.
Nice.
And
I think it's one or two I've seen.
yeah, there were shops we used to haunt when we went to Chinatown. And he'd always go in there and ask him if he had. The guy got to know him after a while, and they weren't cheap. Even in those days, I think they were between $5 and $7.
And this was in the 50s.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it would have been in the early 50s, very early, before 1955, and probably 51, 52, not later than 53, for sure. And the guy even knew him in there, and all he had to do was go in and say, "You got any new panel boxes?" And so. We had. I learned about panel boxes because he had this collection. Probably he had at least 10 of them, and they started out with the very simplest 1 or 2 moves, and then there was 5 moves, 7 moves, 10 moves, 12 moves. Each one, and then some of them were you had to go backwards, and it was really interesting. But he was kind of always drawn toward that, and I learned from it as well. And then our ritual Friday and sometimes Saturday night of going to Chinatown or the farmers market, and then we'd go out to a movie. And because I came from the East, movies were usually 2. They usually had 2, cartoon and all the rest of it that went with it. Out here, when you went to a movie, you got 1 movie, and it cost more than it did back East, And so I thought, wow, 1 movie, is that all we get? So, but anyway, I don't know if I told you this story when we were at farmers market one time in one of the shops there. Mrs. Reeb had given Dan a $5 bill, and he had bought something, and he went in his pocket to get the $5 bill, and it wasn't there, or whatever. And Dan said, "Oh, I wonder, I must have dropped it or something." And the woman behind the counter said, "Well, I think I saw, there was a little old lady with a shopping bag walking out the door." She said, "I think I saw her bend over and pick up something." And so Dan and I are ready to tear out after him, and rip her a new one. And Mrs. Reeb said, no, come back here. She gave Dan another $5 bill. She said, if she heard us talking, she said, and if she didn't say anything, she needs it more than we do. So that was a little part, the little charitable part of your grandmother.
Yeah. I remember my dad, there was a guy standing outside a 7-Eleven once, and he went up and talked to the guy for a second, and then he opened up his wallet and gave him a $20 bill.
Yeah.
And I said something about it, and he was like, "Yeah, I talked to him. He seemed legit." And he's like, "I don't want to give someone money if I get
just
a bad
panhandling
vibe from them, or if I feel like they're going to go spend it on drugs." But this guy seemed like he was really just hitting hard times, and I told him get something to eat.
But that showed me something. That little demonstration was a lesson, you might say, to a young kid, for me.
Yeah.
And rather than just thinking of recovering what's yours, the other person may need it more than you do.
Yeah.
And so it was kind of a really good lesson. She had a lot of little quirks like that. She was a very generous person. As the one I remember was which her father may think of something else. He lived with her. I didn't live with her. But to me, she was a very generous person, very, very giving person. When we would go to farmer's market, we would have two dinners. We would first have a fish dinner, a halibut fish dinner, and then, of course, two young boys, 11, 12 years old, whatever. And then she'd say, "Well, you boys, gosh, that wasn't very much. Maybe you want to go over to there was a Chinese stand there." So we'd go over and get Chinese food and eat all that, too. So we'd eat 2 meals on Friday or Saturday night. And then she would, one time she took us to Mexico. I was going down to Mexico, and my sister, of course, my family did nothing. Absolutely nothing. And so when I told her, well, Mrs. Reeb wants, and I was asking my mom for permission, essentially, I said, Mrs. Reeb wants to take us down to Tijuana. And wow, Mexico. And so my mother said, yeah, you can go. And my sister said, gee, do you think she'd take me? My sister was about 16 at the time, 17 maybe at the most. And so we were down in Tijuana, and of course, being a young girl, all the shopkeepers were out there making eyes and comments, and I'll take her, I'll marry her. So, but she took my sister and I both to Tijuana when we went, and then in order to kind of repay her, even though when we went out to movies and stuff like that, my mother gave me money to pay my own way. She didn't expect Mrs. Reeb to pay it. Mrs. Reeb wouldn't hear of it. No. She said, I asked you to come with us. I'll take care of it, which she did. And so in our culture, the way you repay someone is to invite them to dinner. Unlike the mafia, they do the same thing. But so my mother would invite her to dinner. And we had, I think the first time we had steaks and stuff like that because Mom wanted to put a good foot forward. And Harriet let me know that she can have steak anytime. She prefers Italian food. So the next time she came for dinner, my mother had made Italian food. And I can't remember if she came 2 or 3 times for dinner. But during that time, she let me know that she liked spaghetti, spinach spaghetti. And this is a green spaghetti you can buy. You've probably seen it in stores and stuff. And so my mother made that for her, and she was very happy. She always seemed on guard and uncomfortable. I have to say that, even sitting at the table, she seemed very uncomfortable. Maybe it was a cultural difference or whatever. Even though, she treated me like another son, because now she was with the family, it was a cultural difference. And,
right.
She grew up in a time when Italians were kind of the low end of the social spectrum. And so I don't know if that was what made her uncomfortable or what. I just think strange surroundings. I can't see prejudice in her. I really don't. I can't ever remember prejudice in her at all, any kind of prejudice. How could you be living in China, you know? And she was around during the Chinese Exclusion Acts here in the United States, so.
The way my mom put it was Harriet believed that white people were superior to brown people, but that Asians were superior to white people. So she was racist, but against white people also. She basically felt that the Asians were the most superior.
She did have a very high respect for Asian people, because she lived there for 24.
She didn't think much of, the African American people or the, I mean, I don't want to talk bad about my grandma, but that's what my mom.
I never saw it. That's all I can tell you.
Yeah,
I never
that's
saw
good.
We never just,
It never
at
came
12
up.
years old, you're not going to be discussing these things
Yeah.
anyway. But she always, when Dan and I would talk about sex or something like that, she said, well, the Chinese always have this in the correct perspective,
Yeah.
when you're a little kid being flooded with hormones, And that was the only thing she said that I can remember. The other thing is she took us, back in the days of Sierra Madre, they didn't have a fence around the cemetery.
Oh yeah.
And so she would take us up there at night because they had lived there before they moved to their house at 2339 Lambert. She had lived there in Sierra Madre, so she knew all. In fact, I think her housekeeper still lived in Sierra Madre, a little old German lady. I think they're all named Bertha, and all the German cleaning ladies of the age were Bertha. And I remember meeting her on one occasion, and maybe two occasions, and she would let us off. She said, now I'm going to drive around to the other side and you guys walk through the cemetery. And we'd walk through the cemetery. And there were, in that cemetery at that time, it's what you see today is not what we saw. It was like an old, unmaintained cemetery. And there you could see where coffins had collapsed and there, it was an indentation.
Wow.
So it was a little different in those days. I know she was a strong-willed person, and that's where Dan and her got into loggerheads,
Yeah.
And not only that, she had a fixed idea of what the social graces were. And of course, her dad was kind of an iconoclast in that area. She would try to raise him with the social graces of the 1920s, And it was outmoded. Though I was raised with the same thing, it was outmoded by, say, 1950s. It began to get very outmoded.
Yeah.
Where men stand up when women come to the table or into the room even, you would stand up
Right.
in a woman's presence. Those type of things. And I think she tried to give that to Dan, and somewhere along the line Dan found out that, this just wasn't done anymore. It was from a different world. I know she thought very highly of the British. She said wherever the British had gone, it always seemed like a very ordered society, and she liked order. And then when she would be driving us, I can still see it to this day, because she would be in the drive. We didn't have seat belts in those days, and she would be driving. Dan would sit next to her, and I would sit near the door, and she'd have her hands up on the wheel like this, and she had this thing hanging down on her arm when we get older, and Dan would go, and she'd get so mad. He would flop it around, and she would get so mad at him. And the insight she gave me insight into a world I could never have hoped to penetrate. And I knew then by her talking that I had got a chance to look into a world, even though it was vicariously, through her experiences of what was correct and what was incorrect in polite society, and the way polite society was. And I've always kind of been grateful for that. Like she said, you could always tell a Chinese merchant who had come from a lower tier in life, and made it financially. She said they were usually badly mannered and using, like we talked about, burping or belching after dinner. They'd be sitting there belching and burping, and they'd put their feet up on the chairs and stuff like that. And she said, but the dignified Chinese were totally different, and the ones that were born into money. But the Johnny-come-latelys or the nouveau riche had no idea about decorum, manners, or anything like that.
Right.
And then I don't know if I mentioned before, Dan and I were, in those days there were a lot of surplus stores, and we were both, I'm still to this day a surplus junkie, because that's where we grew up. You could go in for pennies on the dollar and buy stuff in surplus stores. And I'm still a surplus junkie to this day. Let's see. I think we talked about she used to go to the beach every weekend, and she had a standing hotel room. Did I tell you about the time she lost her ring?
I don't think so. No.
She had this 5-carat diamond ring. It looked like a glass doorknob, and it wasn't a glass doorknob, I assure you. She said, and she told me she knew that when her husband bought it, and I always thought she was talking about Dan, but I think Ott bought it for her. She said she knew it was an expensive piece when he bought it. It had to be at least 5 carats, the diamond was. And it was a very beautiful. My mother when she wore it to my mom's house, my mom noticed it right off the bat. Women notice things like that. To me, it was just a ring. But my mother, oh man, that has to be at least 5 carats. And, at this hotel that she stayed at, she had come home and realized she didn't have her ring on. And she said, so she called the hotel, and she said the hotel had questioned their help and stuff, and nobody had found it. And so the next week when she went back, she always had the same room and everything else. She walked into the closet, she said, and her expression was always, lo and behold. Lo and behold, she says, there it was in the corner of the closet. I don't know how many other people had stayed in that room during that week.
Wow.
But there was her ring in the corner of the closet. Now, call it kismet if you like, but I think because she was a nice person, it came back to her.
Yeah.
So that's my opinion. And as I said, she knew her husband had paid a pretty penny for it when he bought it. I don't know if I told you about, she told me this story about women used to have a little silk bag that they would wear around their necks. And she says, this is, of course, growing up with costume jewelry. Okay, but she was not in the costume jewelry category. The jewelry we're talking about here was the real thing. And she said women had when they went to bed at night, would have a little silk bag they would wear around their neck, and they would put their jewelry in that. She said because in case of a fire, they would run out of the room, they would at least have their jewelry with them,
Yeah.
So she told me that story, which was a little insight into a time that I don't know about you, but I'll probably never be in. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It was a different time, and only somebody that experienced it would know these little details about that time, which is a really cute kind of hole in the wall thing to look into. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So, okay, I've covered that. The fact that I saw them building CBS. Let me go through. Did I ever tell you about your dad's method of cleaning a bedroom?
No.
Well, I think once every week or once every month or something, I would come over and he would be cleaning his room. Harriet would make him clean his room as an experience, I guess, for him to experience. Your dad, when he cleaned a room, cleaned it like no one else ever did. He emptied all of the drawers in the dresser, in his desk, all on the floor. There's a huge pile of crap on the floor. And then he'd go through and re-put it in all the drawers and stuff. While we'd just be sitting there, we'd just talking, and he'd be picking this stuff up, and putting it back in the drawers, dusting things off, I guess. I don't remember if he dusted, but I'm sure he had to. But that was his idea of cleaning a room. I mean, huge pile of stuff in the middle of the bedroom floor.
That sounds like a little bit like what I do, actually.
So the apple didn't fall too far from the tree.
Yeah.
But it was, I always thought, because my mom cleaned my room and I never saw anything like that.
Yeah.
But I think it was her way of giving him a little responsibility for his own room.
I end up with like a time capsule effect where I won't open a drawer for 15 years, and then I'll open it and be like, oh my God, I didn't even know I was missing this. You know?
Yeah, well, everything is so precious for me, it never gets off the top of my desk. So as a result, I've got 15 years worth of stuff sitting on top of my desk, with the most recent on top.
Yeah. My wife was saying, you should go through this big pile of papers and throw out anything you don't need to keep. And I was saying, you don't understand. I've done that before, and this is what's this is
I
the
know,
pile
yeah.
of stuff I can't.
You end up with about 3 sheets gone from the pile or something like that.
Yeah.
Been there, done that. You just have to, from what I've heard people say, is you just kind of have to close your eyes. And if I haven't used it in 10 years, I'll throw it out.
Right.
And right after I throw it out, within a month, I'll need it.
Yeah.
So it's usually reference material, and great for hanging on to reference material.
I hang on to old poetry and anything with a date on it and that reminds me of something in my life I think is valuable inherently. And,
When I stayed over at Dan's, it was not unusual for Mrs. Reeb to boil at least a dozen eggs in the morning and a loaf of bread for toast for the two of us. So we were young growing boys, but she had the great good tasting bread, and she had a way of making boiled eggs that I liked. And what would happen, she'd start out with the pair of us, of course, 2 each and a couple of pieces of toast, right? Gee, that was good. She says, want some more? Yeah, So she'd make more. So now we're talking about 8 eggs instead of 4, right? And then 12.
Yeah.
So she went through, she says, I can't believe it. You boys went through a dozen eggs this morning and a whole loaf of bread as toast, So that's what we did when we were kids, And but they were good. And then I went home and told my mother how she made eggs in the morning. And to this day, I still make them that way once in a while.
Nice.
So, then she had, I said Montana, but I think it's in Wyoming, the Moosehead Ranch, the Dude Ranch. They used to go to every year when we were in grade school. And he would go up there, and I think I told you the horse bit her in the butt.
Oh, right.
Because she was helping Dan up on the horse. But they used to go up there, and there was a guy called Fred Topping. In fact, when I was in either Wyoming or Montana, somebody else was driving, so I didn't know. But I think it's Wyoming. In fact, the ranch is called the Moosehead Ranch. If you look it up today online, you're going to find out where it is.
Okay.
It'll be in either Montana or Wyoming. And Fred Topping was the head wrangler at the time, I guess, up there. And Dan had a picture of Fred Topping, and he looked like he was born on a horse. I mean, his legs, he had bow legs from riding a horse all of his life and all the rest. But I told you the relation
take a standing break for a second.
To Sir Thomas Hooker.
Right.
That's the English connection you were looking for.
Now, is he was an ancestor, or?
Yeah. Dan showed me a picture of him one time. I think he was an explorer.
Okay.
You might want to look it up online. I'm sure you're going to find it. The picture I saw that I recall seeing was one of those typical charcoal type drawings or pencil type drawings of him standing on a limb, sticking out of a mountainside, looking something like that. That's the picture I remember seeing that Dan showed me of Sir Thomas Hooker.
One side note on that is that's how they're related to General Joe Hooker, who at one point he hired a bunch of ladies of the night for his
that's where the term hooker comes from.
Which is where the term hooker
comes from.
Right.
Right. But as I said before, and I can't say it often enough, she gave me an insight to a life I could never live or would never have lived. And that was kind of an important thing.
Yeah.
So I could never have lived on the level of life that she lived. And so I was enjoying it vicariously.
Yeah.
Through hers. And then, I don't know if I told you the last time about when she was up in Harbin and sat next to Will Rogers for dinner.
Tell me again.
Oh, okay. Well, she was seated next to Will Rogers, Sr., for dinner. And she said every time he'd crack a joke, he'd nudge her in the ribs with his elbow. Isn't like, ha, 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 isn't that funny, And she said, I was all black and blue by the end of the evening. And then he thought it was so funny. She said when they left the restaurant or wherever they were having dinner, she was with a group. She said he thought it was really funny that he said, gee, up here, the winter comes in to greet you. You don't go out to it, So when they opened the doors, the winters were very harsh up there.
Yeah.
And she said to keep the windows from fogging up, I think I mentioned this last time too, the merchants would put between the glass a glass of vodka. So
interesting.
It's just one of those things. And then another thing, I think I said it last time too, she was coming out of a restaurant and there was a guy, probably a homeless guy at the time, and she gave him some money, and the friend that she was with said, oh, he's just probably going to spend that on vodka. And she says if it gives him relief for 10 or 20 minutes, it's good enough. So, and that's about all I've thought of,
Nice.
since our time, our last time.
Well, thank you for taking those notes.
Yeah, well, after we had our last conversation, the stuff just came flooding out. I said, I forgot to mention this, I forgot to mention that. But I do have a great feeling of gratitude toward your grandmother.
Yeah. Thank you so much. You've taught me more about my grandmother than I ever knew.
Yeah. Happy I could be there.
Yeah.
And I'm sorry my old friend isn't here.
Yeah.
But we were like brothers. He would tell me things. I didn't repeat them, of course. But he would come over and he was very open in that way.
Mm-hmm.
Very open. Italians are kind of secretive. You only share with the family, and not all of the family. And Dan was with me. He was just open. I don't know that he had any relatives out here, and so I was the closest thing he had to a brother or a relative.
Yeah, we don't have any relatives out here.
Yeah, and so I knew of his.
We're pretty distant from the relatives back east. I don't think he saw his sister very many times in total. He met her when he was 6 at her wedding.
Mm-hmm.
And as far as I know, the next time they saw each other was 1984. Now they might have seen each other in between there, but I might have been there for every time that he saw her after that. And then she had kids, and they're back east, and I'm in touch with them. But it's kind of like, isn't it weird that we're related? I went back east and I had a beer with a couple of my cousins. But I don't. There's such a distance that it's hard to manufacture a sense of family just just because you're related.
Yeah, I have. See, we left the East in 1949 in Massachusetts. And my one grandfather, my father's father, my father was an orphan at 12. And his mother died in 1912. And his father remarried and had another 4 or 5 kids with his second wife, and then the Spanish influenza got him in 1918. So my father was an orphan by 1918. And he was only like 12 years old at that time. And the half of the family that was the issue of the second wife, we were never that close with. And I only remember seeing his full sisters and brother a few times back there.
Yeah, it seems pretty common back then not to be that in touch with the other wife's
family. It was my mother geared everything toward her family. I didn't realize people were supposed to have 4 grandparents. I thought you only had 2, because that's what I grew up with, was 2. And when guys would tell me they have 2 sets of grandparents, wow. But my dad was an orphan at 12, so how could I wouldn't know there was another pair of them in there somewhere,
I was so young when Harriet died that I always thought of myself as only having 1 pair of grandparents, but I'm gradually getting to know about the other pair.
Yeah,
the ghost pair.
So, well, I'm glad you contacted me, because I'm 76 and a half. And God only knows how many years I've got left.
Yeah.
And to open what I've known with your dad.
Yeah. Yeah, it's good to get these memories out where we can access them in our next life.
That's right. So
we can listen to this podcast and remember.
Yep. In fact, where were we? My wife and I were at the Huntington Gardens.
I love it.
Have you been there to the Chinese Gardens?
Mm.
And I said, we were enjoying we always liked to go to the little restaurant or stand there in the Chinese gardens and have the shrimp egg roll.
Oh, cool.
The shrimp garlic shrimp egg roll.
Right.
If you ever get there, try them. You'll be hooked.
I'm vegan these days, but I used to have them.
Oh, okay. They are so good. And I said, we were sitting there eating and looking out over the lake and stuff like that.
Yeah.
I said, God, Mrs. Reed would have loved this.
Oh, yeah. I bet she did. That place is so reminiscent. We went to Japan, and that right there is so reminiscent of so many of the shrines. And
yeah, it's too bad you can't find out where they lived in Shanghai and if those places are still standing.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. If you ever had the inclination to go there.
I would like to. Yeah, I would like to.
Like, I got to stand in the room that I was born in shortly before they tore it down.
I've been to the wing at Arcadia Methodist where I was born.
Was it even where you were born? Okay. But the apartment. Well, my grandmother owned it was what we call a 6-family home where we lived. My grandmother lived on one side in an apartment, and we lived on the other in another apartment. And I was born at home in those days, and we went back east. Oh God, either the late 80s or early 90s, or maybe the late 90s. I don't even remember. And one of my cousins took me to the house. Well, it was all boarded up because they were getting ready to raise it to make a parking lot for City Hall. But we had gone back. The second time we'd gone back, there was a door ajar, and the security guard was there. And he said, I've got him. And I think he didn't want to do the rounds alone in there. And so he said, I said, would you mind if I accompany? He said, no, not at all. And so we went down into the basement, and I said, God, I remember these staircases being much wider than this. They were only probably one person wide. They were very narrow staircase going into the basement. And then we went up to the apartments. I said, this was my grandparents' apartment. And the unfortunate thing is everything was boarded up, so you didn't have a lot of light. And I ran out of film after I took maybe 2 photographs. And I usually keep another roll of film, but I didn't have a roll of film in my pocket. And then when we went through our apartment that we had lived in, I had forgotten where the closets were, and all of a sudden I looked at them. I said, yeah, there it is. I said, I remember those now from when I was a child. And I was born in that very room, and that was my parents' bedroom and for so many years. And I don't know if I told you, but they used to have these poorly plastered up holes in the wall. You could see where they'd been plastered over. They weren't artisans. They were just utilitarian sort of thing. And I asked my dad, I said, I noticed we got that in our house, and we've got it, and Grandma has one in her bedroom. And I said, what was that for? My dad said, that was a communications intercom system. Oh. It was one of those things you pull out of the wall and go, whoosh, it blows down where the servants' quarters were. Because the house was originally a mansion. And the guy that owned it was the guy that started Boston Consolidated Gas Company. And he had servants, of course.
Right.
So if he was up on the second floor and wanted something, he'd blow down there and they'd, yeah, what do you want, he'd order whatever he wanted and they'd bring it up to him, And so, of course, when my grandmother bought the place and they cleaned it up, they took all of that out. The hoses might still be in the walls for all I know, but they cut them off and plugged up the holes. That was it. But all the rooms, my mother said, I never saw it as a child. It was probably done when my grandmother was converting it to a 6-family home. She says all the rooms had marble fireplaces, and I remember seeing the marble stacked up in the basement. I never knew what it was as a kid, and you never questioned. You just a pile of crap in the basement.
Yeah.
But it was the marble they took out of those fireplaces, and she said all of those rooms had fireplaces because they didn't have central heat in those days.
Yeah.
And
what a trip.
But anyway, unless you have some questions, that's about all I can give you. Unless you can jar something out of my mind.
Well,
It's something your dad may have told you.
Giant rock.
Oh God, giant rock! You want to hear about giant rock?
Aliens, like people that there were people. He had documentation of these people that he saw supposedly, or that he remembered, that he had pictures of, that their eyes looked weird, their fingernails were too long, they were wearing the wrong era of clothes.
He'd look for stuff like
Yeah.
that. Even if it wasn't there, he'd be looking for it. It's like these Hispanic religious zealots that see Christ in a flower.
Yeah, he'd see aliens everywhere.
In a lawn scraping
Demons.
or something like that. And I'm not mocking them per se, but I'm saying when you're zealous and you want to see those things, you see them.
Yeah.
And that was another good thing. They opened that part of a world to me that I might never have embraced or never seen. And as a result, today, I'm still 50-50. I'm open to anything you can tell me. And in that time, we camped at Giant Rock many occasions. That was our camping spot when we would go and camp. Was Giant Rock, because I think Mrs. Reed felt secure there because the family, Van Tassel's family lived there. And they had a house and a restaurant there. And then there was that thing beneath the rock that's gone now. They filled it all in.
What was that? Which family?
You didn't know about that?
No.
Okay, before the Van Tassels took it over.
Van Tassels. Okay.
That was their name. They had, there was a guy that lived out there during World War, or right before World War II. His name was Frank Kreitzer. And I still have something. Dan and I found a stash of guano out there. And there was a little, like a Prince Albert tobacco can with this letter by Frank Kreitzer. And we had told Van Tassel about it. He said, yeah, he used to live out here before we did. And he had put, guano discovered 1930-something, Frank Kreitzer. So I put a note in there, discovered by Frank Kreitzer. I kept the note, and I wrote a note, discovered by Frank Kreitzer, with all the stuff he had on his notes, rediscovered by Dan Reeb and Ron De Luco, or John Reeb, he used to call himself, and Ron De Luco, 1950-something, And so I still have that note somewhere at home.
That's funny.
But anyway, beneath the rock, beneath Giant Rock, as you approach it from the short side, I think, what's the little city? Have you ever been out there?
No. Well, he took me out there, but I haven't been out there in consciously.
Okay, well, when she'd drive in, we went a long way over a dirt road. And
that's the way we would go, yeah.
There's a short way in.
Structure?
I've been out there with Dan.
Mm-hmm.
Dan took me out there one time. I don't know if he was separating from Nancy or your mother or whatever. We drove the whole day. We went to Idlewild. We went everywhere. It took my wife and I. Our butts were sore by the end of the day. It was an 10 hours we were just driving. He just needed to, defuse from whatever was going on. And when we went out there, we approached from the, I don't know if it's north, south, east, or west, but you would go, when he drove it, we came in past Quartz Hill. There's a hill of quartz, you can't miss it. And
he wrote about that in Transformation.
Did he?
Yeah, he made reference.
And then as you look at the rock, if you dug down into that area below that, that's where that room was. It was all concreted in and everything. And I think Frank Kreitzer lived there in the old days. When we were there, I'm surprised we don't have a picture of it. That Mrs. Reeb didn't have a picture of it.
I'll keep an eye out.
Yeah. And it had like glass. As you looked at it, it had like a side of glass so sunlight could come in during the day. And it had this steep staircase going down into it. And it was a large room, but, it would be an attractive nuisance for kids today. So I think they either filled it in or blew it up or whatever they do with things like that. Blowing it up might be a little dangerous, so they probably just filled it in. And my guess is if you went out there, if you were really determined and went out there, started digging around, you might find the concrete steps and everything that went down in there. And then on the other side of the rock, there was I'm trying to remember. They had a real kind of a clicky name, the Walk-In or something like that, which was run by the Van Tassel family. And you could get a hamburger, a cup of coffee, whatever you wanted. And I think when we camped there, Mrs. Reeb felt somewhat secure since the family lived there. There were usually other people around, so she felt somewhat secure being there. And she was a trooper. Dan and I would sleep out on a blanket with our sleeping bags, looking up at the sky, seeing all the shooting stars. Wow, look at that. I never realized there were that many shooting stars. If they said make a wish, hell, we'd own the world.
Yeah.
But with all that we saw, and there were no satellites in those days.
Right.
And she would crawl in the back seat of the car, and that's where she would sleep. And then I can remember she bought what she thought was a camping stove. It was a little sterno stove about this big. At that time, she bought it at Market Basket. I remember seeing them there, and she used to shop at Market Basket. And Market Basket that she shopped at was on Altadena Drive, right up above Colorado. It's now part of JPL or something like that. It was, on the left, right on the corner of that first street above Colorado. Anyway, that used to be a Market Basket, and she bought this little sterno stove there. So she loved her coffee, God rest her soul. And she was going to make herself some coffee in the morning. Mm-hmm. Well, if you're going to try and make coffee with a sterno stove, you're going to be there quite some time. So after we sat there for 45 minutes and the water still didn't boil, she took it into the restaurant there, and they put it on their burner. They had propane, and it boiled, and she gave him $1 or something like that. She'd always paid her way. I mean, here. And, they said it didn't cost that much. Plus, I don't know if you know how much she gave a fortune to the Van Tassels.
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, we're probably talking 5 figures.
Wow.
And the first one wasn't one.
Huh.
From what Dan told me, I think it was about $50,000 she gave him.
Interesting.
And
it's for them to do what?
They were going to build this college of universal wisdom.
Oh.
And if you go out there, you'll still see this building. It looks like a radar dome on the ground.
Yeah, that's what I was remembering.
Well, your grandmother
Paid
probably owns it, or a good piece of it.
We've been inside of that. My dad brought me inside there.
Yeah.
And he.
No
wonder he felt
had
like
access.
he owns the place.
Yeah.
Yeah, he walked in and there was a guy with a beard,
Mm.
and my dad was talking to him, but I got the sense that my dad was like, "Yeah, I was just checking in, wanted to see how things are going here." And the guy was like, "Oh, very, very good, sir." But I don't know if that guy knew who he was, or maybe he did.
Depends who he was.
Yeah.
But Van Tassel lived out there, and supposedly, this was going to be the College of Universal Wisdom or something like that. And every now and then in one of these space type shows, you'll see they have that. I guess it's wired around on the inside like a big antenna or something like that. And Van Tassel managed to get some money out of that. And when we used to go out there, Van Tassel had a plane, and there was a runway there. It was a dirt runway, but it was a runway he had there. And he had a generator at night. They would run the generator until some hour, and then they shut things down and go to bed and whatever. But they used to have all kinds of space conventions out there. And I don't think I was ever at any of the space conventions. I don't remember. But Dan used to go, and Mrs. Reed went. And the big people in the space movement at the time, the Truman Bethrams, what was it? Gosh, the names escape me now, but all the big names in the flying saucer thing, Kehoe was one of them. He was a major in the Air Force. Truman Bethram was one, and I'm trying to think of the guy that was up at Palomar. And we even went to his house, and he showed us all of these pictures and things that he supposedly met these Venusians, and he was later turned out to be a fraud. They all have later been turned out to be a fraud. When she took us there, it was on the way. We'd gone up to Palomar to the observatory, and I had heard of Palomar, of course. At that time, outer space astronomy and all of that was really big in that time. There was that little time period that I think people, were looking for altar gods or something like that, or some connection, some meaning. And so the space movement was a big movement at that point. And, it was there was a part of me that just couldn't accept it. There was a part that did, but a part that didn't. Right. The part of me that accepted it said, okay, put this back in memory. If it turns out to be, it is. And if it turns out not to be, well, it isn't. And so I was not prejudiced one way or the other.
Right.
Whereas I think your dad, and perhaps to some degree, your grandmother embraced it totally.
Yeah.
Obviously, she wouldn't have put that money into it if she didn't embrace it totally.
That's
but,
true.
You know, that's where your dad got his leaning toward esoteric things.
Yeah.
Was from her. I can remember her talking to me about things Chinese. And I don't know if it was Dan C. or if it was Ott that was the engineer from MIT. And
Sounds like Ott.
Yeah. And she said she saw tables levitate. You know, she says, in those days, you know, we were talking about fortune tellers one night, and I said, how nice it would be, to know what the future is. She says, you don't want to know what the future is. She says, believe me, you don't want to know. And she said, and then she explained to me that at parties at that time, it was fashionable to have fortune tellers, and she had her fortune told, and her fortune apparently predicted the death of her husband when her fortune was told. I don't know how it was told. She didn't explain to me. But she says the problem with having your fortune told is when things begin to happen as they were foretold, you begin to wonder, is this going to go all the way to everything that he told me?
Right.
And she lost her first husband, and so she was pretty upset. But another thing she told me is, I guess seances and levitation, all of that stuff was big in those days. And she says it was not uncommon. She went to many a seance, I'm sure. But she said her husband was an engineer, MIT grad, and she said they had flashlights when this table was levitating. They're sitting around with their hands together. Dan and I, we all tried it. I mean, Dan and I would sit around the table trying to make the damn thing move, It only moved if you kicked it by accident. But anyway, she said this table was levitating, and she said they were there with flashlights. These guys that were engineers, they were Standard Oil people, so I assume some of them had technical savvy. And they were looking around for, wires, gizmos, and things that would make this happen. And she said they couldn't find anything. So, as a little boy, you're listening to this, wow, And so there's always a bit of fear of the unknown when you're a kid. And Italians tend to be superstitious anyway. If you can't explain it, panic. So my mother was very superstitious, and so all I needed was this little bit of encouragement to make that even more so.
Yeah.
So, but no, it was very. She was just an interesting person.
Now, you mentioned about the MIT graduate and Standard Oil. Do you know if George Ott was connected with Standard Oil?
The best knowledge I have is she was the widow of 2 Standard Oil executives.
Yeah. Oh.
Dan C. being one, and Ott. Now, that is my understanding.
Because I didn't know how they met. I didn't know how or when they met.
That is my understanding. I'm not saying it's fact.
Wow.
That's my understanding. The feeling I got as a child is both of them worked for Standard Oil.
Okay. Well, that would explain what they were doing in Russia. Because I always wondered what she was doing in Russia.
And whenever she said, I think I told you the story last time, the guy who was the ambassador, the Russian ambassador or whatever at the time, it would have been after the revolution, I'm sure, gave her a pass to where she could go anywhere on the train she wanted to in Russia.
And
her
George
husband
was jealous.
Her husband. Now, I don't know if she was talking about Ott there or if she was talking about Dan C.
That would have been Dan C. because he didn't go up into Russia. At least not regularly. He was more the China period.
Yeah, well, I don't know how often she was in Russia.
Yeah.
I do know the story I told you where she was in a troika being shot at by warlords.
Refresh my memory?
Oh, well, it was funny because, remember, I've seen your grandmother in blue jeans. So
right.
This is the gal I see hanging onto the thing that's like a chariot, And she said, we were up somewhere one time. She said, my guard had a rifle, or the guy that was driving the troika had a rifle. And she said, all of a sudden, she says, bullets began landing around us. She said, and he whipped those horses around. She says, I was running behind it. I barely got on in time.
Wow.
And she said, you could see the ground going by through the slats in the floor. And she says, I'm hanging on to like a chariot,
God.
She told me this story.
Wow.
And she says, these bullets were whistling around us, So.
Dang.
But
yeah, she lived at both of them. Dang.
So you can see how my vicarious enjoyment of her stories because
those stories from China have inspired generations of various branches of the family. There's I have family in New Zealand that have heard the stories of Dan C. Reeve in China that are the descendants of Dan's sister Mary.
Mm-hmm.
And so I mean, it's good. It's good to get as much as I can of these stories out onto the airwaves, so they don't get lost,
Yeah, something flashed through my mind that I was going to say, and then I forgot.
Oh yeah. Oh, sorry.
No, that's okay.
Russia, was it about China or?
It'll come back if it's going to come back. Otherwise it's gone forever. At
Now,
my age, thoughts kind of fleet through your mind.
Do you know how she ended up in Sierra Madre? Was she from there originally, or did?
All I know is that she went. She and Dan C. ended up in Sierra Madre, and I remember her saying that her husband, and I'm assuming I'm sure it was Dan C. Because I think Ott died over there. That he was so smart that he had sprinklers installed on the roof in case of a forest fire, because it comes down pretty low there. And so he could turn the sprinklers on the roof and protect the house.
That's a good idea.
And I remember one time in the early 1950s there was a fire, and you know where the square is in Sierra Madre there?
Yeah.
You could stand in that square and there was a fire, and they weren't letting people into Sierra Madre because I can remember I was in the car with Dan and her when she was going up to her bank. Her bank was, I think, across the street from what is now either a taco stand. It used to be the fried chicken stand.
The B of A.
It wasn't a B of A. It was the Bank of Sierra Madre in those days.
Oh, wow.
And she had a safe deposit box there. And plus, I'm sure she had a bank account there.
Yeah, that's Lima and Sierra Madre Boulevard he's talking about.
Yeah. And so...
or Lima.
That forest fire was raging up there, and of course, we couldn't go into Sierra Madre. And she said, "Well, my bank is there. I have banking to do." And so then they let her pass on through. And so, of course, once we were in Sierra Madre, we were able. The town was ours essentially for just residents and that. So we went to the square, and in fact, somewhere in my stuff, I've got a couple of pictures I shot.
Oh, cool.
And they may have the dates on them. I'm not sure of that fire. Looking up that what is it? I think is that Baldwin Avenue? I think it's Baldwin Avenue.
Yeah.
Baldwin Avenue in Sierra Madre Boulevard.
That's right where they shot a few of the iconic scenes from Invasion of the Body Snatchers.
Right. Yeah, I remember seeing that. Yeah. The staircase that went up that isn't there.
Right. But they were running up Baldwin with the Body Snatchers chasing behind them.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it's good.
I only vaguely remember. Sci-fi was so big in the early 50s, and I can remember going to 3D movies and seeing They Came from Outer Space, and there were a number of them. And boy, you'd have those 3D glasses on, and for young kids, I mean, you'd stand there and there'd be a rock slide, you'd be going like this. I mean, it really looked like it was leaping out.
That was coming. The blue and the red?
No, these were polarized.
Oh, cool.
The ones in the theater were polarized.
Oh, neat.
And it's the blue and the red one.
Today's?
The blue and the red one is for TV.
Oh, I see.
Because you have three guns, or you did in my day. I don't know what they do now.
Yeah.
You had a blue, a red, and a green gun.
Yeah.
And so what it does is one eye sees one and one eye sees the other.
Right.
And that's the way they do that. But we had in those days, you used to be able to keep the little cardboard glasses. You throw them in a drawer and throw them away after a while if you go to see a couple of them. And I can remember, I think They Came from Outer Space was one that we watched. Whoever it was Richard Carlson was in it, I remember that. And there's this landslide, and these rocks come just leaping out of the screen at you. And I mean, whoa, we're going. It was that realistic.
My first experience of that was Captain EO at Disneyland, when there's the little flying elephant creature, and then its trunk comes out at you, and you're like, whoa! Like,
yeah, I've had a few of those too. Even I didn't think I could be deceived in my current day, but
actually,
illusion.
Like reaching in front of your face.
What is it? They made a movie recently about the illusionist or something like that. Remember
that?
A few years ago, maybe 10 years ago. The Illusionist.
Yeah, I don't know if I saw that one.
And that was really good. And then they made another one with Michael Caine in it, and it's called
The Prestige.
The Prestige.
That was great. I love that.
Well,
Especially
that
David
was
Bowie
the
as
sequel to
Tesla.
The Illusionist.
Oh, okay. I know they were connected.
Yeah.
Or they had
It was how they do some of the
similarity.
stunts and stuff
Yeah,
like that.
yeah.
And then, of course, they worked in stuff about Tesla. And
Yeah,
all
with
the rest
David Bowie playing the role
Right.
of Tesla.
So there was some of that in it.
Yeah.
But,
Huh. Well, let me see here. 118. All right.
Got an
I
hour
think we
and
got
18
some good
minutes
stuff. Yeah.
okay, so I think I showed you all the pictures in there that were in the front. That there was one of your grandmother in a fur, kind of a glamour picture.
Yeah, I think I'm going to use the one of the glam shot with her with the other models as the image for this episode. That'll be
There
fun.
was one, I think, of Dan's father. Dan had a folding thing in his bedroom, as I remember. His father was on one side, and that glamour shot was on the other.
Oh. Yeah, that sounds familiar.
It was a book.
I have a picture of that actually. On one of my other.
And I think Dan C was on this. It was just a facial upper body of Dan C and her, and that glamour shot of her in the fur, looking off into space, sort of thing.
Yeah.
On the lounge, on the chase or something.
Yeah. I have a science fiction podcast that is based on real life, and so it all starts out in the den of the main
Does
characters.
anyone else have information on them?
Oh, well, this is the picture that I have. It's just his old desk.
No.
Yeah, it's not one of those.
No, this was it was in his bedroom as a child that I remember.
Oh, I
It was
see.
It was like this. And Dan C was here, and the glamour shot of her. I saw it every time I walked in and out of his bedroom on Lambert.
Yeah.
And then by his bed, I thought it was an old aunt or something like that. It was Mary Baker Eddy.
Oh, yeah.
And he had this shot of Mary Baker Eddy. So, when I see something and say, well, that's Mary Baker Eddy. Well, how do you know Mary Baker Eddy? Yeah. I grew up with her, looking at her from the extra bed, from the guest bed.
That's fun.
But, yeah, it's too bad. Of course, all of her peers would be gone by now.
Yeah.
Some of your dad's peers, and I don't know that your dad had, and I maybe am taking a little pride in this, a friend as intimate as I was with him in his youth. Even maybe Nancy, of course, would know a lot of this.
Right.
Have you talked to Nancy?
No.
She might.
Yeah.
If she's still around, I don't know if she's still
Somewhere, I think.
Dan would be my age. I'm 76.
Yeah.
So Dan would be my age, and I'm assuming she would be within 2 or 3 years.
Yeah, they went to school together, yeah.
And so she may be able to give you some insight
Yeah, I'll think about doing
into
that.
their early marriage. I don't know how long they were married, but one thing I do know is Mrs. Reeb always liked Nancy. Even after the divorce, she liked her and kept up her relationship with her.
Yeah.
And I think the reason for their separation or their divorce was Dan wanted children and she didn't.
Oh. Interesting.
So I think that was the reason they went their separate ways.
Yeah.
But Mrs. Reeb, it's my understanding Mrs. Reeb gave her pieces of her jewelry and stuff like that. As she got older and would, I guess they'd meet for coffee or lunch someplace. Because Mrs. Reeb still had a very high opinion of Nancy for whatever reason, I don't know. I didn't know Nancy that well, Most of people that came with Dan I accepted because of Dan. And even his wife in Sarah Mondre now. I accept her as my best friend's wife.
Yeah.
And I'm sure she may even have something that she could tell you.
Oh, yeah, I've been thinking about that, too.
I forgot, what's her name?
Sue.
Sue, that's it, Sue.
Yeah, I check in with her every now and then, but I don't know if she'd want to do an interview, but I'll see.
I don't know, how long were they married, do you know?
3 years.
3 years.
Yeah.
So, sometimes it takes longer than 3 years to find out all the things you might want to know about your mate.
Right.
My wife keeps saying, yeah, I know that story. Yeah, I know that story. I said, you want to hear it again? We've been married 51 years.
Yeah.
So she's heard just about all the stories.
Yeah, my wife has heard all my stories. It's just that there might be some little nuance or some detail about a story that she was like, oh, I didn't realize that was connected to that. Yeah.
But Sue may have some insights that she can give you.
Yeah.
And Nancy might. And then on a professional level, Dick, Sue's current, or was last time
Nancy's,
I knew.
yeah.
Nancy's current companion, her husband or whatever. I don't know if they're still a pair. Are they still a pair?
I don't know.
Because I know they were last time I spoke to one or the other of them, but people.
Yeah, there was always. I grew up, knowing them as people that we would go see. That were friends of the family. It'd be, oh yeah, Dick Pierce was saying this, and yeah, we're gonna go see Nance, and drop something off, pick something up. I don't know. We'd go down to their apartment over by PCC.
Yeah, well, he must be. Dan would have been my age, so I'm assuming Dick Pierce would be about my age.
Probably,
so they might have retired, and they maybe don't even live in the area anymore.
Yeah.
A lot of people move away.
All right. Well, thank you very much for this interview.
My pleasure. Anytime.
All right.
Anything I know, I'll be happy to share with you if I think of anything in the interim that I haven't already told you twice. I'll write it down and get in touch with you.
Sounds good. Thank you very much.
For pictures and other information about my paternal grandmother, I've created a page for her on Facebook. Just search for Harriet Louise Howie Reeb and click like on that page. Thank you all for tuning in. Good night.
Well, that was fun. I hope you all enjoyed it. And that was episode 137 of Gwydion's Asshole Podcast. Yeah, so, okay. And until then, I'm going to get back up on the lion throne in the eye of the pyramid on the back